President von der Leyen's umbrella policy to get the EU to its goal of reducing emissions down to net zero by 2050. Since the Farm to Fork strategy was unveiled, obviously, we've had the COVID-19 pandemic. It's the reason we are meeting virtually right now rather than seeing each other in person. And obviously, there's been a lot of lessons learned here. It's the reason we're talking about questions about how food systems can be resilient to crises like this. Now, some civil society stakeholders are calling for a redesign of our food systems, one that accounts for nearly 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. They claim the current systems consume large amounts of natural resources, result in biodiversity loss and negative health impacts, and don't allow fair economic returns and livelihoods for all actors, in particular for primary producers. Now, separate to its climate goals, the EU has also signed up to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. The strategy targets specific SDGs, Goals 7 and 13 on energy and climate, for instance, or Goal 2 on agriculture sustainability, Goal 3 on health, and Goals 14 and 15 on biodiversity. But the goals of the Farm to Fork strategy won't be met without a collective approach involving local, national, and EU public authorities, private sector actors across the food value chain, non-governmental organizations, social partners, academics, and of course, citizens, the people who are actually consuming the food. Now, we've assembled an expert panel with us here today to talk about these issues. Let me introduce them to you now. First, we have Diego Cangafano, Principal Advisor for the European Commission's Agriculture Department. We have Greek Left MEP Petros Kokkalis, member of the European Parliament's Environment Committee and also a member of the European Food Forum. We have Arnold Puech-Dalisac, Vice President of the Employers Group and member of the Section for Agriculture, Rural Development and Environment at the European Economic and Social Committee, the EESC. We have Mary Kenny, Food Safety and Consumer Protection Officer for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the FAO. And finally, we have Timothy Cullinan, First Vice President of the Committee of Professional Agriculture Organizations, or COPA, which represents over 22 million European farmers. He's also the president of the Irish Farmers Association. Welcome, everybody, and thanks so much for being here with us today. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping notes. You guys at home are going to be able to ask questions to the panelists yourselves using the Q&A feature on Vimeo. If you're watching this in any other platform, it's not available, so you'll want to switch to Vimeo if you want to ask a question. I'm going to go ahead and start that Q&A now on Vimeo. You can type in your questions at any time, and toward the end of the panel discussion, I'll be reading out your questions. It's great if you can identify yourself and your organization when you ask a question. Of course, if you want to ask your question anonymously, that is okay as well. And of course, you can follow the debate on Twitter as well using the hashtag you see below me there, EA Debates. So let's go ahead and get started. Diego, I want to start with you because you're obviously a real expert on this policy. So how would you say the Farm to Fork strategy can help the EU meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals specifically? Obviously, you have the big climate targets that the EU has, but when it comes to the UN SDGs, how does the Farm to Fork strategy fit in?
Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you very much, Irakli, for this invitation. I'll give you my very personal views about your question. And for replying to your question, I will make a distinction between SDGs 7 and 13, affordable energy climate action, 15 and 14, life on land and life below water, and I will leave for the end goal number 2 of zero hunger. Now, it's clear Green Deal is the origin, then Farm to Fork goes more into the specific. We want a more sustainable farming, and that means reduction of pesticides, that means fighting deforestation, more organic farming, trying to reduce antimicrobial resistance, and all these principles are in the Farm to Fork, and we are putting them into place, but we will not succeed alone. So the European Union will make its contribution to the SDG targets, the ones I mentioned before, And it's clear that what we're doing goes into the right direction. But as I said before, we're not going to do that alone. We need help of some partners, and we're working bilaterally and globally. And when I mention bilaterally, so you know, the farm to fork strategy foresees creation of green alliances. So we are doing those green alliances bilaterally with some third countries like Japan, Switzerland, New Zealand, India, China, Canada, the neighborhood countries. And we have dialogues with them where we are discussing precisely sustainability of farming, and bilaterally also through free trade agreements. As you know, we are trying to insert sustainability chapters in free trade agreements to share this agenda of sustainability for farming. So that's as far as bilateral is concerned. Concerning multilateral, we are working with the OECD, the G20. I'm happy to have someone in the panel from FAO as well, because FAO is doing a great job in this area. So the direct question to your answer is, I would say it's relatively easy to reply to your question on the SDGs 7, 13, 15, 14. So the green agenda of the European Union definitely goes into the right direction, and we want to expand this sustainability farming in the whole planet. It's a bit more tricky, the question of SDG number 2, zero hunger, because there, when you talk about sustainability and animal welfare and reduction of pesticides in places where people have difficulties of having one proper meal per day, it's difficult, this speech, no? And I'm thinking in particular in sub-Saharan Africa. I happen to travel often there, and you see places where there is no water nor electricity. It's difficult to have this green speech, no? But at the same time, those areas are precisely those who are struggling more with climate change. So I think one of the things we have to do collectively is to convince the whole planet that climate change, fighting climate change, is in the interest of all countries, not only the developed, rich Western European countries. That's a thing we have to do. And when explaining the benefits of sustainability farming, we have to insist, in my opinion, that is for the benefit of all. I think we should insist less on the idea that we need to protect our farmers from unfair competition. I hear very often this argument, which is I think there's a point there, but I think there's more important that the sustainability fight should be in the interest of the whole planet and not only of Western rich European countries. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks a lot. I mean, that's interesting what you say about the EU working with the whole world, and I think Mary can tell us more about that a bit later. Let's go to Petros next. Now, you're very involved in holding the Commission's feet to the fire in making sure that the EU is delivering on its commitments here. So what would you say still needs to be done to implement the Farm to Fork strategy if the EU is to meet these UN SDGs?
Well, thank you. Good morning from me, and thank you for the invitation. First of all, it's going beyond the Farm to Fork strategy. There's a lot to be done on a general EU level to meet the SDGs. We have we have seen the inclusion of the SDGs in the European semester, which is a very good step. But even though President von der Leyen had assigned the SDGs to commissioners, we still don't know who is in general responsible for coordinating the general achievement of the SDGs. Now, in particular, in regards with the food system, I think it's clear that we need to think more deeply about how we produce food and also how we consume it, how we are informed about it, and how we can hopefully do much better in the future, given that we know we have to feed a lot more people and we have to feed them better. So it is really essential to implement pathways towards a more sustainable and circular agri-food systems, considering not just the production of food, but also the storage and the packaging, the processing and farm transport, the consumption of food, and also the recycling of waste materials that come from this. I think it's very crucial to realize that the SDGs offer a holistic view of approaching the world. It's a system where we have to break down silos between different conversations, which we have had in the European Union and also in the member states. And I think that the Green Deal is a fantastic framework to do that, precisely because, as such, the Green Deal breaks out through the silos and seeks very radical transformations across a number of sectors. So the Farm to Fork strategy obviously contributes mainly to SDG 2, no hunger, which is really yet not such a significant issue in the European Union, but we have other indicators. So it's important that we work with Eurostat to develop better indicators, not only for SDG 2, but for all the SDGs. And I think we could see it in three areas. Food and nutrition security would be SDG number 2, no hunger, and of course, SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, which is about the circularity and cutting food waste. And of course, SDG 3, which is about good health and well-being, given that diet is responsible for a lot of the non-communicable diseases. Now, in terms of sustainability and environment, SDG 6, clean water, crucial for agriculture, SDG 7, energy, climate action, life below water, life on land. And lastly, on the part of economic and social development, the third part of the sustainability chain would be looking at SDG 1, SDG 5 on gender equality, SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth, and of course SDG 10 on inequalities, and 11 on cities, which are the prime consumers. So the tools to implement the action, the Farm to Fork strategy is the action plan, and the targets what we set by 2030. And I think that not only in the Farm to Fork action, but in general, we have to increase the coherence and the integration between the different EU policies and construct and go ahead with a single dialogue, not many different parallel dialogues where we talk in one committee about energy, in another committee about food, in another committee about employment, and so forth. And I think it's also very important to integrate governments at all levels, especially with agriculture in the rural areas. And lastly, to align and monitor the Farm to Fork strategy with the relevant SDG targets. We need very specific targets, which will be monitored by the Commission on the member state level to make sure we achieve these very noble and necessary targets. And I think it's very important that we understand the Green Deal in the food policy much more as an adaptation than a mitigation effort. It is true that there is a lot of emissions coming from food production, but it is also true that it is food production that is mostly threatened right now by the climate change that is already happening. So we have to think more of in a mindset of adaptation at this point.
Thanks. Let's turn to Arnold next. Arnold, I mentioned in my opening remarks that this is going to really require collaboration between a lot of different actors. So what does the agriculture sector specifically need to do to help in meeting these UN SDGs?
Yes, thank you very much, Dave. I'm very glad to be with you and to take the floor in the name of the Economic and Social Committee for the group of the employers. And as citizen, as a ESC, we are very glad to support the Green Deal. We think it's a very good idea that the Commission go in this direction. Unfortunately, for the farming sectors, the Farm to Fork strategy seems to be very far from the truth of the farmer now. And we are really afraid by the goal fixed by the Commission in this first declaration. But we will see more about the means we need to be more efficient, to have a less carbon footprint. We have different technologies that we need to keep or we need to develop. I want to mention, first of all, the NBT, new breeding technology. If we want to produce more with a less carbon footprint, you need to have the best seed as possible. And the new breeding technology is a solution that we need to develop. It will be technology we will use at the end, less chemical, less chemistry, and of course, it will be better. Secondly, we need to have a real resource management implement. In some countries, it's very difficult to storage the water. We have seen this winter that a lot of rain is falling in Europe, And unfortunately, it's very difficult to storage the water because the rules are very difficult. And if you haven't water at the right time for your crops, it will be very difficult to produce. And the water resource management is something fundamental. And the last thing I want to develop as a precondition, it's the carbon border adjustment mechanism. We need to protect our European food industry. Our sectors need to be protected. If we are not sure to have the same rules than the other, even the Commission try to develop a more fair trade with the other competitors in the world. We haven't this mechanism of protection now, and don't forget that we are the more importators area in the world, and we need to be protected. And we expect also, and we repeat, that all the regulation need to be science-based. And about chemistry, I want just to have a quote I read this morning, very briefly. There are too many people counting chemicals and not enough people who understand basic chemistry. It's the only thing I want to say, because I know we try to be the more efficient as possible. Thank you very much.
That's an interesting line. Thanks, Arnold. Mary, let's go to you next, and let's take the opportunity with you to kind of zoom out to the more global level. How would you say that the EU strategy fits in with efforts that are being undertaken globally to meet the SDGs?
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's also a pleasure to join you. I think want to congratulate the EU on the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy. It's very good to have let's say a blueprint or an outline of how the EU sees transformation of food systems and continuing to balance important food production and food security for all, with protecting the environment and our natural resources as well as we go forward and face the many challenges. I think if we clearly the EU is and the European Commission is a let's say a big influencer, or can have a direct impact on countries in the near region. So we're looking in our region from the FAO's Regional Office for Europe and Central Asia. We're working directly with many of the pre-accession countries and the neighborhood countries. So clearly, when there's food and agriculture policies being developed, or food and nutrition policies being developed, there is a close alignment and trying to follow and harmonize EU policy and direction. So let's say there can be a positive spillover. And we need to recognize as well that many countries in the immediate region of Europe and more globally and beyond are facing many of the similar challenges that you face within the European Union countries. There are there's a great recognition of the need to, for example, reduce food loss and waste, or improve the role and the economic livelihood of smallholders as the starting point and as a key contributor to achieving the SDGs, and to protecting the environment and assuring biodiversity, for example. So work, for example, on geographical indicators. So that there's many, let's say, commonalities and common challenges. So having the blueprint from the EU is definitely one important part of the architecture or policy evolution. I think in addition, the EU being an active member in many, if we think of it at a more global level, there's a lot of other fora and platforms where a number of similar discussions are ongoing, and the EU contributes very strongly to those. I can just mention the recent FAO Conference for Europe, where the governing bodies discussed sustainable food systems and healthy diets. We also have just last week, or just this week, earlier this week, the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition adopted by the World Committee on Food Security. Again, this is a more global discussion on very similar topics, where the ideals and the vision of the farm to fork strategy are being discussed and promoted further. And again, thinking systems and thinking food systems and working on food systems is very much at the heart of what many countries are trying to do to improve their provision of food, but also protect the environment. And but again, it's clear that many countries outside of the EU will face even greater challenges in making this transformation and transforming their systems, because they don't have maybe as many of the foundational building blocks in place as the EU has when it comes to providing food security, as one of your other panel members mentioned. Or there are very real challenges on water security issues and natural resource management and biodiversity loss, for example. But again, having this blueprint, if you want to say, having this thinking of influencing and trying to set out how the EU will handle these things is definitely helpful to the broader regions, other regions globally. But of course, it'll all come down to practical how to do it in countries, and how to do it in countries that have face, as I said, bigger challenges than perhaps challenges are there within the EU, but they can be even more severe in other parts of the world, and coupled with now the COVID-19 challenges as well that you've referred to in your opening remarks as well. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, so much is going to depend on implementation on the ground. Timothy, let's go to you next. Arnold walked us through the actions for the agriculture sector as a whole. Let's talk specifically about farmers that you represent. What is going to be the role of farmers in the farm to fork strategy, particularly when it comes to meeting the SDGs?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Dave, for the opportunity to speak here this morning. Well, obviously, in the Green Deal, farmers obviously have a critical part to play. I suppose we just want to remember, first of all, farmers are first responders to the environment, but our first role here is producing good quality, wholesome, nutritious food. So that is critical in this debate, and we want to be able to continue to do that. And we understand that European farmers have to adjust and to comply with measures of the Green Deal and farm to fork. But of course, there's three main pillars that I see in this. And to be sustainable, you have to be economic, social, and environmental. And economic obviously is very, very important, because it's very hard for us to produce good quality food here in Europe when we're in direct competition with cheaper product coming into the EU as well. So what I would be saying here is, we want to work with Green Deal, we want to work with the EU Commission, but we want a level playing field as well. It's very hard for us to produce cheap food and to compete with food coming into Europe as well. And already farmers are doing quite a lot. If we look at carbon sequestration, we look at our lands, our hedgerows, but what is happening here to date is, we're not getting an allowance for what we're doing. We have to look at a net figure here, what farmers are admitting, but at the same time, what they are sequestering into the hedgerows, into the trees. This is very, very important. And if you look at particularly Pillar 2 in CAP, all of the environmental schemes that are there already, and farmers have been adhering to these for numbers of years. And I think it's very important in the debate that we look at what has been done to date. But I can't stress enough the importance of good, nutritious food. You know, if we look at where we are in the world at the moment, we're in the midst of a pandemic. And I think that the one thing that has come through in all of this is, you know, farmers producing good, wholesome food is absolutely essential in battling where we are in the world, not just in Europe. Do you know what I mean? This is absolutely critical for us at the moment. And I suppose the other one is, like, we're looking at all those new measures coming in, and you know, we need to be able to assess this. There needs to be an impact done on the cost of all of this to farming and to the food industries. Because if we want to sustain sustainable farmers in Europe, well then, before we go forward with this, a study needs to be done, an impact and an assessment on the cost of this. And we are on the journey, and we are on the journey with Ursula von der Leyen, that we want to become carbon neutral by 2050. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Timothy. I want to come back on that point in just a second. Just a reminder to you guys at home, you guys can ask your questions to the panel using the Q&A feature on Vimeo. Make sure you put your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. If it's the chat, I won't see it, so it needs to go in the Q&A. So Diego, I wanted you to respond to the points made by Arnold and Timothy about the impact on the agricultural sector, particularly on the point about whether the targets are feasible and are close or far from the situation for farmers on the ground. And also to Timothy's point about competition, fair or otherwise, from the rest of the world. How would you respond to their points?
Thank you. First of all, I think this crisis has shown the importance of farmers. I mean, we have been seen for months criticism against farmers. I am a great defender of the farmer community, and I think it's good to show the great job that the farmers are doing in Europe, and it's in the moment of crisis where you see the importance of farmers. Now, it's true that the Commission has suggested some targets. It is also true that farmers are doing already a lot in improving sustainability farming, because farmers are part of the problem, but also part of the solution. And don't forget also that farmers are contributing very well to solving the problems of biodiversity and so on. The targets that the Commission has suggested are going to be discussed now with the co-legislators, and we will see what will be the final outcome and what will be the level of ambition at the final common agricultural policy. But what I can say now already is that at least in terms of financial support, what the Commission has put on the table, rather what the Council and Parliament are putting on the table in terms of financial support, is extremely relevant, and so there's going to be support to the change. Talking about competition, let me remind you that we are net exporters. I'm happy to discuss about imports, but we are net exporters with a big differential, and this we are net exporters, and every year we are more and more net exporters. Why are we so good? Because we have two huge advantages when we compete in the planet. First of all, we have amazing quality in the European Union. We are the old continent, and we produce, I'm sorry to be so clear, the best food and drink in the planet is produced in Europe. And we have this huge advantage of quality. And second, we have zero problems in terms of public health. So the food we produce here, the drink we produce here is outstanding and with no health problems, no public health problems. And that gives us a huge competitive advantage when we export. And as I said before, this balance between exports and imports, we are more and more net exporters. So yes, we can discuss about competition, about unfair competition. I think there is a point, there is an issue of unfair competition, but don't forget the global picture. We are net exporters. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Petros, let me put that same question to you, if I can have you react to what Arnold and Timothy said. I mean, a lot has been made of the declining number of farmers in Europe. So how can the strategy sustainably support farmers also while the farming population is dwindling?
Well, there's no question that the decline of farms in the European Union is staggering. And this is something that needs to be addressed not only because of the food security issue and the food policy issue, but also in the sense of rural development and the vibrance of rural areas. I can't think of Europe that is just made out of cities. However, I think going back to the adaptation point, it's farmers are not only the first responders, they're also what we call in terms of climate change, of climate action, which is what we call the frontline communities. They are the first community whose livelihood is threatened by the changing climate. It is obvious that farms and plants and animals cannot move due to changing weather. So I think we really need to support farmers and in a sense that we protect them from climate change. I think that the goals set by the Farm to Fork are feasible. I want to remind everybody that we are currently at 1.1 degrees Celsius above normal, above what our food system is accustomed to. And I also want to remind that even in the best case of successful global climate action in the next years, we will only achieve 1.22 degrees. This is a world for which our food system is not designed to deal with. So it's very crucial that we step in now and we set radical but realistic targets to achieve this. Now, on the issue of competition, first of all, I would like to say that I don't see why we would have a carbon border adjustment mechanism for everything else except food. It makes sense that it works for food as well. And also that we have to think also in terms of productivity. True, there is competition from other cheaper markets, but on the same time, there is huge competition for better paying jobs in the services and industry sectors from the cities, and that is why people move away from the rural areas to the cities. So we have to work a lot in making a completely different farming sector, which is much more technologically developed, much more edge, let's say, and in that I think we could use a lot of digital instruments, and we should work hard to introduce the so-called digital innovation hubs in the agricultural sector, so that we actually do bring this disruptive technology into the food production sector as well.
Let's talk about COVID and its impact on the food sector and the agriculture sector. It's a global problem, obviously, pandemic. So let's turn to Mary. I'm curious to get your perspective on this. What lessons do you think we've learned about the sustainability and reliability of the food supply chain as a result of this pandemic?
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. I mean, I'll speak more from the view of our 18 program countries. I'm in the regional office of FAO rather than a global perspective, if that's okay with you. We, as explained to you, we work with 18 program countries in the Balkans, in Central Asia. This is more our focus region. I think what we've seen, both in our region, but also probably across many other regions as well, is that through the COVID-19, we have seen that at one level, the food supply chains have managed to keep working after some initial, let's say, hiccups in the beginning due to the immediate lockdowns and transport issues between countries, and even some policy trade decisions by some countries in our region to stop the export of grains. So in the beginning, there were some slowdown of issues, or some, let's say, challenges in the food supply, but they very much sorted themselves out fairly quickly. And I think overall in our region, we can say that at a high level, food security and our food systems worked. They bounced back. We saw great resilience among farmers as the first line of our food producers, but also among the food industry and the retail sector as well, of providing food. Having said that, let's say at a high level, it seems to be looking at a macro level. The systems worked, but we definitely did see certain cracks being exposed. And there's been a great deal of reflection both on the policy side, but also on the policymaker side, but also on the private sector side of some areas where we might want to do things differently as we go forward. I think the COVID-19 has definitely re-stressed the importance of food systems, the importance of having secure supply chains, the importance of, let's say, smallholders, and having and dealing with natural resource management as well. I think it's also highlighted some opportunities. As I said, there was resilience, there was innovation by the private sector and by community level as well. So we've seen innovative approaches, for example, to ensure that food could be provided to the most vulnerable. In many countries, as the schools shut, then vulnerable school children didn't have their essential one meal a day. So at community level, food was rechanneled to replace this. There was a lot of initiatives also on replacing markets. We all know from our daily lives that certain big export markets were lost. And then there was a need to refocus on, let's say, shorter value chains or more shorter markets. And we also saw a great increase and more opportunity for digitalization and innovation as we go forward as well. On this, I think that I fully agree with the previous speaker that the digitalization can play an important role in improving available technologies as well to smallholders and small food producers. But I guess we also have to work hard in the countries we're working in to avoid a digital divide, as we're also talking about. So opportunities on one hand, we saw the systems were resilient. I think it refocused our need on continuing to do many of the things, farm to fork type approaches, food systems approaches that need to be built up in the countries that we work with, and also to ensure always as well that we're having the safe quality food that some of the panel members were talking about as well.
Arnold, from your perspective, what lessons do you think the agriculture sector has learned from the pandemic?
First of all, we have discovered that our citizens like food. And when they were in the family bubble with the lockdown, really it was very often the pleasure to discover again how to cook, what to cook, from where is coming the food we use. And we have seen also the willingness of the citizen to pay for food, and it's something very, very interesting for us, and it's a nice sign of love. That's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, we have seen also that we are in a market, in a European or in a world market, where open border for the worker, because we need worker in our farm, in our sectors, in our industry, and we need foreign workers very often for our job, need to be open, and it's something very important. And we need also open border some time for import because we have not the climate to produce all the basic feed we need for to produce our food. And also we need open border to export. And like Diego say, I'm totally agree with him. We are a net exporter, but it's always very fragile. And to be a next exporter, we need to keep our high level of quality, and it's must to be well known, and the right labeling of our production is something fundamental. Now we have a system where it's a European labeling, but I am sorry for most of the citizens, they like a produce who came from their country, even from Europe, but first of all from their country. And the regulation about labeling need to change to put forward the origin labeling. That will be nice.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, Arnold. I can say anecdotally, I have been cooking way, way more than I ever did before the pandemic. And I'm also spending more on food when I go to the grocery store because the quality of the ingredients I get has gone up because I want to try more and more complex cooking. The key reason being is I have the time for it now, right? Because we're all home all the time. It's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that before, that maybe I'm not the only one doing that. We have tons of questions from the audience, so I want to go straight to the audience questions now. The first question is coming from Gun Rudquist. He says they say that the farm to fork strategy includes food from the blue sector, which is far from sustainable today. Please suggest concrete policy changes. I think that's a question for Diego. Diego, what can be the policy changes to make the blue sector more sustainable?
We are fighting everything which has to do with illegal fishing, and we are amending our legislation on avoiding EU use in the jargon. So on sustainable fishing, it's illegal, and we are strengthening the rules and the sanction against that. What I know as well is that we're also improving everything which has to do with organic aquaculture, so make it not only blue but greener as well, the fishing, and that's what we're doing. I mean, the question is correct, but we're working on it. It's not that we are neglecting the issue.
Petros, do you think that enough attention is being paid to this sector?
Well, yes and no. This is again a question of silos, David. I mean, I am a substitute of the Agri Committee and also the PES Committee. So we recently had a very big and very good, actually, study done on the future of food and the future of food security, which for the Agri Committee, which although it spoke a lot about nutrients and nutrition and protein uptake and all the such, there was no mention of fish, as if it's not part of the diet. So this is a crucial point of looking at things holistically. I mean, it's crazy. We actually talk about food security, and in one committee we talk only about agricultural products, and in the other we talk only about marine products. So this is one thing. Diego very correctly said about the measures we're taking to combat illegal fishing and to protect fish stocks, and also about making sure that aquaculture is developed in a way that is green and digital. But I would like also to raise the issue of ocean fishing and the issue of ocean governance in general, where we have a lot of waters which are international waters, and these right now are not clearly policed or not monitored in a way that they should be. I think we should all agree that, fish do not know borders as such. And so this is a good point where we need to see the issue of food and climate change adaptation globally, and we cannot only see it in Europe.
So we have two questions on trade that have come in from the audience. First, from an anonymous questioner for Timothy and Arnold. Do we need more trade deals or more protection for European farmers in relation to the farm-to-fork strategy in the Netherlands, I see great division about this. We also have a question on trade from Sarah Fitzgerald. Is the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter of the EU Mercosur FTA enough to help the region, that I assume that Brazil, Argentina, et cetera, to reach the SDGs themselves? The EU imports vast amounts of soy from Mercosur to feed our animals, to feed ourselves, rendering us complicit. Timothy, let me go to you first for those questions. On trade, do you think the answer here is more trade or more protectionism, to boil it down very simply?
Look, I suppose we have to look at this and look at European farmers. You know, we're positioned in one of the best areas in the world to produce good quality food. And what we're seeing here now is we're being asked to do more and to get a lower return. So we're going to be using less chemical fertilizer, less pesticides. We're looking at transitioning more European farmland to organic farming. So that is going to be, what is going to happen here is we'll be producing less food at a higher cost. So we need to be compensated for that. So if the EU policy is, particularly if we're looking at Mercosur, to continue doing trade deals where we're sawing down forests, the Amazon forest, to produce more food in South American countries, and import that produce into Europe at a cost to European farmers, when we can actually produce that food here. What I'm saying is, I think enough is enough on the Mercosur trade deal. We need to be looking at regressing on the volumes coming in, and I don't agree that we have to import more, particularly beef, into European market that's already oversupplied in that market.
Let me take this opportunity while you're up on the screen. Just there's another kind of related question. Timothy, are there specific types of crops where the EU farmers are more vulnerable to imports?
Obviously, we need to import protein into Europe, and we need to look at a policy of growing more protein crops here in Europe. And I suppose we need to have the debate as well, you know, around gene editing, because we have genetically modified crops, obviously, that are coming into Europe, particularly in soya, as was mentioned earlier. So I think we do need to have an adult debate around gene editing. So if we're going to be using less pesticides and less chemical fertilizer, well, then we need other ways of being able to produce safe, good quality food within the EU.
Arnold, so let me put these same trade questions to you. Do you think the answer is more trade or more protection?
I think we need more fair trade, and Timothy developed in his first statement the idea of a level playing field, fair competition. It's something fundamental for us. We are agreed to work with most of the country in the world if you respect the other. When we play rugby, we play with the same rules. When we play trade, we need to play also with the same rules. It's something fundamental. That's the first thing I want to say about the Mercosur. The big difficulty is they can produce very cheap produce, and because they have very large farm, they have huge poultry building, they have huge herd of beef, and it's not what we have in Europe. And of course, we will never be at the same level than them, and never able to produce at their cost of production. And at the same time, they use a lot of produce or techniques who are banned in Europe. And of course, it's not fair to be directly in competition with them. That's why we are very concerned about that. It's also available for the vineyard sectors, also available for the agruma sectors, and in north, in east, in south of Europe, everywhere in Europe. we are afraid by this agreement with Mercosur, because it's not at all what we have called in the past the European model of agriculture.
Petros, what's your take on this? Is the answer more trade or more protection?
Well, I think that the global trade agreements of the European Union are a good point to realize that the European Union has chosen, and rightly so in my view, and has a great political support across a lot of political groups and definitely across the citizens spectrum, to be a leader in the green transition. And that, of course, like we said, includes food production. So very much like we are ahead in climate diplomacy, and we have chosen this not only as an economic development, economic growth policy, but also as our position in the global diplomatic sphere. I think that it would be hypocritical to trade with under agreements that do not respect the European status quo. I hear that we are a net exporter. I'm not sure if this includes animal feed, for example. So given that I spoke about the need to protect farmers in terms of adaptation, I think that we don't talk enough about the biodiversity laws and the twin strategies, farm to fork and the biodiversity strategy. So it really makes no sense to have agreements that do not follow these rules and that have these horrible consequences in common goods, planetary common goods, such as the Amazon rainforest and other such areas. So I don't think that trade is something we should not be doing. We should be doing, but we should be using our power, our strength, and assume the responsibility to push forward with our Green Deal objectives within our trade agreements. In conclusion, I think that international trade agreements are good and necessary so long as they are used morally and responsibly in ways that do not circumvent what we preach in our home in the European Union.
Staying on the trade issue, Petros, you mentioned net exports, and the next question is exactly on that for Diego. You mentioned that the EU is a net exporter on food. What is the best way to avoid excess food miles? Nevertheless, is it a good thing that the EU is a net exporter?
I think it's a good thing that the EU is a net exporter, because we have statistics about how many jobs and growth we obtain in Europe thanks to being net exporters. As I said before, I think we are the best in the planet in producing food and drink. I mean, we are the old continent. The Greeks produced wine 20 centuries ago. Olive oil is produced by the Romans 20 centuries ago. We have a fantastic tradition. Sorry to be non-modest there. We are the best doing food and drink, and this is going to continue. And that is good for in terms of creating jobs in the European Union. Tomorrow, the College of the Commission is going to approve a trade policy review. I haven't seen the final text, but I think some of the concerns that I hear about the questions and my colleagues in the panel about sustainability of trade, all that, I hope there will be a nice reply tomorrow by the Commission.
Okay, stay tuned then. Mary, what's your take on these trade versus protectionism concerns?
Thank you, Dave. I will leave it to the core EU people to discuss the detail as they have done in the EU context. I think we are seeing continual. I mean, again, working with our target countries that are still working to improve efficient and sustainable value chains. We have seen a core need there to also due to COVID-19 to build up production and to try to continue to increase market access. again, for many of our countries, they would not have such strong export markets, and they still have a lot of catching up to do to meet the standards on quality and safety, as well as now growing environment, balancing the concerns with the environment as well. So it's really a priority for many countries in the region, agri trade and market access. What we've also seen, again, similar to many countries, is the importance of internal trade of food and agriculture commodities, and the emphasis now on short value chains as well, to try to increase local food production for many of the benefits we know about in terms of the environment, but also very much linked to livelihoods and fair and decent employment opportunities for smallholders, for family farms, and for small and medium enterprises as well, to be able to meet the needs. There's a great untapped potential in many countries where we're working to have more efficient value chains and to have more local food production, as well as relying on imports from the EU and other trading blocs, and also trying to increase export to those trading to those other countries as well, to increase their income potential as well.
So our next question is for Arnold. It comes from Christoph Dirksens. We currently waste 1/3 of all food produced from farm to fork. And with just 1/4 of that wasted food, we could feed the whole global population. So why, Arnold, do we need to produce more?
First of all, when I say we need to produce more, it's because we will not only produce food, we will also produce the energy we need to reach the carbon neutrality for 2050. The biogas we need, the bioenergy will produce with methanization, the crops we seed between two crops just after harvesting. It's also a way to produce more, but to keep that for the nature. And about the waste, I am totally agree that the waste, it's always a big challenge, but most of the waste is made in the family. And in Europe, we put in the garbage 20 kilo of food per person per year, and in this 20 kilo, 7 kilo are still packaged. That's why it's our way of life, who sometimes is not enough efficient. And about the problem of the world, it's always difficult to sell produce in country where they need food, because when you sell cheap produce or produce, you don't help them to produce their own food. And they need also to storage their waters. They need also to have the right seed for their field, and to have the right yields, the right advice to protect their animals. And it's a difficult problem, but really we need still to produce more to reach once again the carbon neutrality for 2050.
So we have a question asking for some clarification here from Fatma Kansajlik. So the question is, this is for Diego. Is a carbon border adjustment mechanism, is the plan right now for that to apply to agriculture and food or not? There seems to be some confusion on that.
I think the answer is yes, but I'm not entirely sure because I haven't seen the draft. I think there's under discussion now. I have seen some report from the trade committee in the parliament, but the truth is that I haven't seen the draft. So sorry to be for once avoiding the clear reply because I'm not entirely sure about my reply.
It sounds like maybe that isn't decided yet. Let's take this next question. Is an interesting question on slow food. This is coming from Madeline. Let me put this question to Timothy. Which concrete opportunities do the speakers see to increase the uptake of agroecology? And Timothy, do you think that the Farm to Fork strategy has those incentives built in for a move in that direction?
Yeah. Look, I think it has, but again, we need to be very careful here in moving forward. I think I just want to go back to a point I made earlier as well. About there was a point made about food waste as well, and ecology will come into this as well. And I think we can also look at technology and matching demand with supply will be important here as well. But look, I think like farmers want to look after their soils. I think that is very important, and that is what they have been doing for years, and will do into the future.
On a related point, I think we have another question here from Anamia Kanjal. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I'm going to open this to whoever would like to answer it, because obviously, as Timothy suggests there, producing more sustainably does involve more costs for farmers. So how would you secure farmers' income when costs of producing more sustainably and environmentally friendly are higher? Who would like to tackle that? Yeah, Petros, go ahead.
Well, I think this is a great point here because I think that one of the lessons of the pandemic or I think one that made us think differently, is about what we really value. So what is of true value in this society? And we've discovered a lot of things about a lot of lower income, lower paying jobs that kept our societies running, and about the role of the state and the role of public finance and versus the self-regulation of the market. So I think that the food production sector is a great point where we see that there is a discrepancy between real value, and market price. So it's true that farmers do not get compensated for the value they provide to consumers. This is, of course, a very complicated issue, but what I would like here to say is that we have been a little bit dodging the discussion about the need to change the diets towards more plant-based as opposed to meat-based foods. And I think that Arnold made a good point about how we are slowly recognizing the value of food, how we are moving away from the idea that food is just a commodity. And we, in the European model of food production and eating, we are gladly not approaching the American model of only processed foods. And it's very important that consumers realize the work and the inputs and the art that is involved in production. So in terms of incomes, I think that the move towards agroecology, I think that the demand of the biodiversity strategy for 25% of organic agriculture provides a more labor-intensive and more value-added avenue towards promoting agroecology. On the other hand, we have a similar situation as we are having with the energy transition, where we should be very mindful of the energy poverty and the food poverty. I'm not suggesting that we increase the price of food. I am suggesting that we do find ways to use the one and only truly functioning common European policy, the Common Agricultural Policy, to ensure that both the food producers and the food consumers get what they need and get what they ask for. It is obviously that we cannot only rely on farmer subsidies as we do in the CAP currently, but we do have ahead of us the strategic plans where hopefully we will see that the national strategic plans, where we'll hopefully see that both the farm to fork and the biodiversity strategy goals are integrated, and that the Commission will move forward with monitoring these targets.
Okay, Diego, Timothy, you had a comment as well?
Yeah, I would like to comment on that, Dave, as well. And what we need here is we need to be able to see where the margin is going along the food supply chain. I'm speaking here particularly about retailers. I think what we have seen, it was tremendous to see the transition from food service back to consumer buying food and cooking at home. But at the end of the day, we have to see a margin in this for the primary producer, as in the farmer. And we need to look at the history of the CAP as well. And the reason initially the CAP was set up was to help European farmers to produce cheap, good quality food and supply a good quality food at a low price to the consumer. Now we are seeing a shift here now. This is one major concern I have with the Green Deal Farm to Fork and the biodiversity strategies, is we are moving the compensation from producing food to protecting the environment. And we want to be part of that, and we are part of that, but there needs to be a balance here as well, that if we are producing this good quality food, well then there has to be a margin in it for the farmer as well. And the other thing we need to look at here is the age of European farmers. Farmers are getting older, and we need to be able to encourage young people into this sector as well. And that's where we have a major job of work to do in this strategy as well, to ensure when these strategies are put in place that we do encourage the younger generation into agriculture, into farming, into producing good quality food.
Okay, Diego, I'm going to fire off 3 audience questions to you before we go to the closing statements from each of the panelists. If you could answer these really succinctly, that would be great. So first question is on a sustainability standard. Do you think a sustainability standard for food will be developed? That's the first question. Second question, are there strategies or key technologies to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas and methane emissions from the dairy and cattle sector? Is that part of the farm to fork strategy? And finally, third question, the Renewable Energy Directive is in the process of being changed. How do we guarantee that biofuels will only be grown by crops which do not cause displacement or additional land reuse? I know that the biofuels question is a whole big thorny thing, but if you could answer as succinctly as possible first on the question of a sustainability standard for food.
Sustainability, yes, there is some legislation preparation by our colleagues of DG Sante, so we'll have some further news during 2021. On the strategies of reducing greenhouse emissions, I follow what we're doing in terms of research, and I know we're putting money on research, Horizon Europe, to reduce emissions from dairy and cattle. So the answer is yes as well. On renewable energies, on the biofuels, I must admit I'm not on the final discussions there. So sorry, I cannot be precise on the latest generation of biofuels. I'm sorry.
Okay, great, fantastic. That was very succinct. Thank you, Diego. So now let's go to our closing remarks. Arnold, I'd like to start with you. What are your key takeaways from today's discussion?
I feel that even if we have not the same point of view at the beginning of the meeting, at the end of the meeting we are more close. I am sure that the strategy farm to fork is need to be more explained, to understood how to reach this goal, and maybe also why, but still the how, because the methods for me it's not enough clear, and the market it seems it's for me the driver's guideline and the example for organic farming, to have 25% of the farming area in organic, need to be linked 100% with the market. It must not to be decided at the EU level. Sorry.
Mary, what are your key takeaways today?
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. I think some of the key takeaways are the focus that's been put on the important role of primary producers and the importance of having a system that works for them, so it's sustainable across the areas of environmental, economic and social. If we really want to transform our food systems holistically, we do have to focus on those three areas of sustainability and make sure that our food policy decisions or our actions on the ground are trying to tackle those three areas. It's also very interesting, as we said at the outset, that many of the challenges and issues that are important to the EU are definitely similar to what has been discussed in other regions. The important role of the consumer, I think, is key in terms of them driving the market, but also us as consumers having the adequate information and knowledge also, and economic power to be able to have balanced, nutritious, safe diets. This is really where we are trying to continue to focus. And I just want to add at the end that I think, as you know, this year there is the UN Food System Summit as well, which I think is a very important opportunity, and there's a lot of work ongoing already at country level through the national dialogues in the region to discuss many of the issues that we have been discussing here today. So I think there's, while there are many challenges and also a need to look for countries to look in more detail at COVID-19 impacts, there's also important room to continue these challenging dialogues and discussions to see how best to improve food systems in all regions and in all countries. Thank you.
Definitely a good opportunity to continue the discussion. Timothy, what are your concluding thoughts?
Dave, I think it was an excellent discussion this morning, and I think the one thing that's really coming through here is, and particularly on the back of a pandemic, is the appreciation of good quality food. And you know, if we look at European farming, what are farmers doing and have been doing for generations is working the soil, and it's about creating food from that soil, but also protecting that soil. And elements of the farm to fork will help us along that way. Farmers have always done that, but I can't emphasize enough the value of food. And so we want to do this sustainably, and it has to be economic, and the social aspect of this as well. Keeping people in positions, working on the land, working right across rural areas of Europe. This is critical as well in this. And obviously the final one is the environment. We are willing to play our part in protecting the environment. And we're looking at a circular economy here. And I think by all actors in the chain working together to produce this good quality food by protecting the environment, and I think we can all work and move forward together.
Petros, what are your key takeaways?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me in this very interesting conversation. I want to say nice to meet you to everybody here. I would like to take it back to the SDGs and saying that we have 10 years to deliver on the SDGs by 2030. But just by a brief glance, you can see that out of the 17 SDGs, 14 are affected by food production and food consumption. So there is, I would like to instill the sense of urgency here to realize that this is a food transfer. This is a greater transformation, the green transition that needs to happen if we're going to stay below 2 degrees, and that what we're really talking about here is a great food transformation, almost like, let's say, not a revolution, but a radical transformation of the food system, which would need and needs to include multiple stakeholders, food producers, food consumers, policymakers, and the whole very complicated food chain that we have seen. So in this, I think that it's another critical point where we need to heed the lessons of the pandemic, to understand its causes, and in order to become resilient towards future crises, we need to learn the lesson to think out of silos, do not remain locked in paradigms, in past paradigms, and be brave enough and bold enough to deliver on Build Back Better and deliver on new approaches and new results with boldness. I say this understanding that this has been for many years a close discussion in the farming sector, specifically around the common agricultural policies. But this is an instance where we see these silos breaking, and we have in this discussion now not only the farmers, but also the market, also the digital side of things, the consumers, and everybody else. So I think in closing remarks, I think we can do it. But we need to keep talking all together and working fastly and without being locked into paradigms of the past, because really there is no normal to return to anymore.
Great. And finally, Diego, what are your quick concluding thoughts?
Thank you. I'll say something about COVID-19. I've been working 30 years in the European Union, and from time to time in Brussels, you hear some logos, some new words. I remember the first time I heard the word transparency. I remember the first time I heard the word subsidiarity. Now there is something very fashionable, this open strategic autonomy. You hear everywhere, open strategic autonomy. Now, I want to make the link with food, because in the field of food, thanks God, we are independent. And we have this open strategic autonomy. And the reason why we're discussing now, it's because in the pharmaceutical sector, we were not self-dependent, we depended on the others. But in the field of food, thanks God, and thanks to the good work of farmers for many years, we have autonomy and we're not dependent from the others, and even we are net exporters. And the funny thing is that I discovered this idea of being independent on food. It is already written in the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Since 1957, one of the objectives of the European Union was to be self-sufficient in producing food. And I think I want to make this point now, where we're trying to discover in which areas we are dependent, in which areas we are independent. I think it's, I want to conclude praising the work of farmers community, because we did have a health crisis. We haven't had a food crisis, thanks God, because we have a system which is resilient. I wish everyone could have the same in the planet. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Diego, and thank you to all our panelists for some really interesting interjections. We'll have to wrap it up there, but as Mary said, there'll be plenty of opportunities to be talking about these issues going forward in the future. So thank you again to our panelists, and thank you all at home for asking some really, really great questions. I was very pleased with the quality of the questions here. Thanks very much for that. And I wish you all a great rest of the day, and remember to cook some excellent home-cooked quality meals. Take care.